Hello and welcome to the JCC of Metro Detroit Online. My name is Debbie Levin and I am one of the co-chairs of SAGE. It's my pleasure to welcome you on this Sunday afternoon to Spicing Things Up, the Flavors of Crypto-Jewish Life. Today's event is presented by SAGE, Seminars for Adult Jewish Enrichment, and the Detroit Jewish Book Fair as part of its season of 70 stories for 70 years. To see the full event schedule for both SAGE and the book fair, visit our, watch events you may have missed and find on our online store. Visit our website at culturalarts.jcc.org. If you enjoyed this event and other cultural arts events, please consider donating to SAGE or becoming a festival patron. You can do either or both at our website, culturalarts.jcc.org. Community support makes our programming possible, so thank you in advance for becoming a part of the family. We have a really interesting presentation for you this afternoon, and we want you to be part of it. You can ask questions and offer comments in the YouTube comment section below or by texting the number in the corner of your screen. Our speaker has a great presentation prepared, and we'll take as many of your questions as we can. While you're here at our YouTube channel, please don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and click the reminder bell. That way you'll never miss any of our exciting programs. Our speaker today is Jeannie Milgram, an author, speaker, and cutting-edge researcher into genealogy practice and the history of the Inquisition and hidden Jews. She has been a featured speaker for AIPAC, the Knesset, and the EU Parliament. She sits on and has led several organizational boards, including the Jewish Genealogy of Greater Miami, the Society of Crypto-Judaic Studies, the Jewish Genealogy Society, Kulano, and Tarbat Sepharad in Barcelona. Since 2015, she has been spearheading a global initiative to digitize Inquisition documents, and since 2020, she has been the director for Anuism for Kulano.org. We're thrilled to have Jeannie with us today to share her personal story along with the history and practices of Anuism. We also have with us the JCC Senior Director of Cultural Arts, Jamie Loeb, who will take your questions. So please welcome Jeannie Milgram this afternoon and Jamie Loeb.
Hi. Thank you so much, Debbie, and thank you for being here, Jeannie. I just am popping in to let everyone know exactly what the format is going to be. Jeannie has a talk that is in two parts, and in between the two parts, I guess after the first part and after the second part, we'll take some questions. So as the questions come into your mind, do put them in the comment section or text them to us. I will make sure to keep track of them, and we will get to as many as we can. So with that, over to you, Jeannie.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Debbie, Lauren, Jamie, I really appreciate being here with you today. It's incredible how we've all adapted to being somewhere where we're not. So this is great. Today I'm going to start with telling you all my personal story. It's a story that has to be told, and I do want to point out that it's affecting, or let's say there's many people like me around the world. And I guess, you know, if we hear of these people, then you'll pretty much know, oh, so-and-so is a returnee from the Inquisition or their family. Then you will probably understand that their story is very similar to mine. In other words, I do not feel that I am unique. I just speak a lot on the topic. I was born in Havana, Cuba, and my parents moved to Miami when I was 4 years old during the Castro Revolution. They were one generation in Cuba. My grandparents were born in Spain, and they were first cousins. My family was a staunch Roman Catholic family from Spain, living in Cuba, and then subsequently in Miami. We got to Miami. I was put in Catholic schools immediately, all very strict Catholic schools, girls' schools, Catholic high school, Catholic Girls University, Berry College. And this was, let's say, supposed to be my path, who I was, and it didn't quite work out that way. From a very young age, and I mean young, very young, like 7, 8, I began to feel that all the dogma, all the information that I was being taught, it just did not resonate with me. It did not. I did not feel that I was part of this, let's say, social group that I had been born into. My sister was 4 years older. I would look towards my sister, and she seemed to be just fine moving along in this. But something for me, whether it was what I was being taught, whatever it was, it just did not sit right for me, and I felt different. But what do you do with this? I mean, you're a little girl. What do you do with this? You don't do anything until I got to university level. And at the university, I started studying comparative religions. And of course, we learned everything, Shinto, Buddhist, everything you could want. And when we hit Judaism, I was like, oh my gosh, this is where I belong. This is what I have all of these years been looking for. And I was religious. I led spiritual groups. I was always that person that was in front of the spiritual group, giving encouraging talks and things like that. But let's just say I wasn't feeling it about virgin birth, other kind of dogmas that go along with the Catholic religion. But life took over. I got married super young, right out of college, and I had 2 children. I married a Cuban Catholic man, just like I had been expected to. And life went on and on until I reached about 28 years old. When I reached about 28 years old, I said, and my kids, I started putting them through all the Catholic rituals. I said, I just can't do this anymore. This is not who I am. I feel very attracted to the Jewish religion. At that point, I had been able to meet some, let's say, Jewish people, which I did not have the opportunity as a child, but I did. And I was always drawn to them, like really just, this is who I am. And of course, subsequently divorced, and I was left as a single mom with 2 little kids. So I don't know what was better. It was not an easy time. I was always in the family business, and I started pursuing Judaism. It was not easy within my family. They were, let's say, one of the elite Cuban Catholic families living here in Miami. So it didn't go over well. It was very hard. I started like hitting roadblocks everywhere socially, not from an anti-Semitic point of view. And I'm saying that clearly because a lot of people ask me if this was anti-Semitic. It was not anti-Semitic. I'm very aware of what anti-Semitic is. It was more of people not wanting to be different and not wanting you to be different. In other words, my mom had a specific path. I was going to be just like her, a socialite in the Cuban country clubs here in Miami, or like it was in Cuba, a socialite, and that just wasn't who I was. So I started going around. I went to Reconstructionist, I went to Reform, I went to a conservative synagogue, all in my neighborhood. I live in a very Jewish neighborhood, still do, always did, and ended up a tiny little shtibel, a Young Israel. And, black hat, the rabbi, tzitzis flying. And this is where I felt that really I was at home. It took me 5.5 years to convert. It was a very long, drawn out conversion for a young woman who wants to get on with her life. It was extremely difficult. No one was talking to me. I mean, of course, people talk to you, but I was no longer included as part of any real social groups. And my family was really like, what are you doing? And it was a very, very, very difficult time. I still have a hard time talking about it. And I do tell my story often. Lately, I've been trying to tell like different parts of the story, but people always want me to come back to this. But it was very difficult, honestly, to go through this. I did not convert my children. Funny enough, I felt it wasn't correct. I felt it wasn't right. I was having an existential crisis from the time I was very young, and it just didn't seem correct to be able to have to convert my children. It didn't sit right with me, and I didn't do it. So I guess that made my journey that much harder. I did finally convert with an Orthodox Beit Din, and I began to lead an Orthodox life by myself, with 2 kids that were not Jewish in the house. And there went the Saturday morning practices. And there went, I think the most dramatic in my home, my daughter was 3. And then at the end of this, she was 8. I think the most dramatic was when I became kosher, that I was not able to get her Pop-Tarts. I mean, when you're 8 years old and you've been eating Pop-Tarts all your life and they're not kosher, it's a problem. Or, taking my children to cheerleading or games or whatever it was on Saturday. So obviously the life became a little bit different. A lot of the things fell on their dad, but I still felt that as much as I wanted them to be Jewish, I did not feel that it was correct. So life went on, and I met my husband, who was in the same business. We've always been in the same business, in pharmaceuticals. I met him overseas. And the rest is history. We've been married for 30 years. He was from a small, let's say from a small town, and well, not a small town, but from Antwerp in Belgium, and Hasidic. So you can imagine that this background of, the Catholic and all that, and then converting Orthodox, but not Hasidic. So then marrying a man who was Hasidic. I mean, a horrible mishmash, but there you go. That's who it was. So everything went on okay until the day that my grandmother died. The day that my maternal grandmother died, and she knew that I had converted. She kept telling me, this is so dangerous. What you're doing is so dangerous. And I kept thinking she thought this was dangerous for my soul. I mean, that's a Catholic concept. I did not, as much as I studied, and believe me, in those 5 years, and 200 or 300 books read after and during and before, and everything the rabbis insisted that I learned, they didn't make this easy for me. I had a PhD in being Jewish, and my grandmother, I didn't realize a lot of the things, and we'll talk about it in a minute. She was teaching me Jewish customs all along. I absolutely did not realize. And don't ask me why I didn't realize. I was just so caught up. But anyway, she died on a Friday morning. And I thought, oh my gosh, but they were Cuban, they were Catholic. So I said, okay, the burial will be Monday. And my mom says to me, listen, in our family, we have to bury within 18 hours. 18 hours is Saturday morning. I'm like, Mom, like in Spanish, por Dios, what do you mean? We're going to do this on a Saturday morning. The cemetery, the funeral home's 10 miles away. I just can't do this. So I spoke to my rabbi, and he gave me 1,000 ways to get out of this, and how to work with this, knock it out. And all of them involved with my sleeping in a funeral home. And I just couldn't do that. So unfortunately, I didn't go to the funeral. It was very painful. And of course, it caused even more drama with the family. It's, I hear stories of Baalei Teshuvos when they come back, and they're in Reform families, and then they go off to Israel. And then, this is kind of come back super religious. This is kind of the same thing. Not that I'm super religious. I'm Orthodox, but observant. So I couldn't go. It was really extremely painful. And it's still painful today for me to talk about this. So Saturday morning, I had just come back from shul, and I was in my house with my girlfriends and my friends that come to visit. And my mother comes up through the drive, and she brings me a box, and she said, your grandmother wanted you to have this on the day she died. And in the box was a hamsa, very antique hamsa, and some earrings with Stars of David. In the presentation later, I'll show you a picture, but I want to tell you my story and show you everything afterwards. She gave me a family tree that my grandfather, who was my grandmother's first cousin, had made, taking me back to like 1780, 95, something like that. And it was in very scribbly handwriting. And I could clearly see, I had not seen it till that moment, that everyone from my grandparents back were married to a first cousin. And I'm like, what's going on? And just after a few days, I contacted a genealogist in Spain and I said, I need you to help me through this. I need to know what's going on. I just want to find my maternal lineage. I know there's a lot of anti-Semitism in Spain. I didn't want to tell them I was looking for a Jewish lineage, but I thought, oh my gosh, my grandmother, while she was teaching me to cook, she taught me how to check for blood in the eggs. She taught me to take a little bit of the dough when we were making a lot of cookies or bread or whatever, and to put it in aluminum foil and throw it in the oven, which is what's done by religious women today with a blessing. She never taught me the blessing, but she taught me how to do that. She taught me to check all the vegetables. I mean, it was so now I had like all of these Jewish cooking customs. I had the hamsa and the Star David earrings. I had this, what do you mean you're burying in 18 hours? So it was all like not making sense to me. And my grandmother, I realized, was probably telling me that it was dangerous to be a Jew. Not that she was telling me that it was dangerous for me to be Jewish because of my soul. She was really showing true fear when she said, I think that the fear really came forward. I mean, something incredible through all of these generations. I mean, now they're studying epigenetics. I think that's exactly what we were looking at. So in Spain, meanwhile, back at the ranch, like they say, the genealogist was locating, and he pretty quickly went back through the Catholic Church, got back to my 15th grandmother, which is when I wrote my first book, My 15 Grandmothers. And there was some circumstantial evidence, but there was no evidence that would point directly, let's say, but there was so much circumstantial evidence, like none of the babies had been baptized. In the baptism record or birth record, which was the same thing in Spain, it always said that they were too sick to be baptized, and then nobody died. So it was just, there was a lot of these little things, again, cousins, more cousins, everybody marrying just cousins. And that, I know that happens in little shtetls, and they did come from a small village, and I'll show you information about the village afterwards. It's right on the border with Portugal, but I still felt that it was enough with everything that I had. The genealogist was able to find a random reference to Jewish roots in the Inquisition in a box. None of the Inquisition records in Spain were digitized. They were in boxes saying 1400, 1300, 1500, no towns, no villages, just like thrown in there in the Central Archives in Madrid. So there was some references, but not enough to say, okay, I have a strong case. But I gathered everything up and I went off to Israel, and I went before the Beit Din Gadol in Jerusalem, and there were people there, one rabbi in particular, who knew about Inquisition lineages, and all this time I had started to become very verbal and vocal on social media, and people like me were trying to come back without the conversion from all parts of the world, whether it's the Philippines or it was Hawaii or it was down in South America, Peru, Ecuador, Bolivia, wherever it was. People were coming in droves, and they were just waiting. I kept posting on social media about what I was doing. And in the beginning, this was about my kids. This was the fact that I wanted that my kids should, now that I had suspected, because I was a convert, therefore my kids were not Jewish, but I'm so thrilled. I mean, the fact of being Jewish is just everything for me, and it meant so much, and it means so much, and it's just like the opus of my life to have been able to return to the Jewish people. I wanted this for my children. Not that they wanted it. They were already older. And, we'll talk about that later. But really, it was for me what I wanted for them as a mom. I didn't do it before. I wanted it to just come naturally, not via conversion. So I packed up everything and I went off to Israel, and I gave the box. I just, it was like one of those computer boxes of paper. We didn't have those flash drives, and we didn't have all of this stuff when I went over there. I think it was 2012, maybe 13. And I just had paper, and the rabbi was very impressed. And he's like, oh my gosh, you've 8,000 people on the street. You've done an amazing, incredible job. However, you haven't proven to us that you go back directly to a Jewish woman. And, we don't have ketubas. We didn't have cemeteries anymore. Everything was destroyed. First of all, we're talking 523 years. And number two, everything, there's nothing. There's just nothing. The only thing there was those Inquisition records, period. Nothing else. So he said, and number two, we have a problem with that village that your family's from, which is called Fermoselle, tiny speck of a village. And I'll show you in a minute. He said, there is nothing on the internet. There's nothing in any history book that village had a Jewish presence. So if you are saying that your family was always Jewish and they lived in that village, you're going to have to come back to us with some evidence of that village being Jewish. Oh my gosh. So there I am in Israel. I live in Miami, and I'm like, I can't do this. I've been collecting and doing and getting and proving and documents and papers and, grandmother after grandmother, an unbroken lineage. That was already amazing. I was at 1545 at the time. So I said, you know what? We're heading on the plane from Israel back to Miami, and my husband, who's always been just incredibly supportive, he says to me, you know what, we're going to have to go to the village. And I'm like, I can't. My kids were teasing me mercilessly. Mom, there was a lot of Moors there was a huge Muslim population in Spain. Maybe you weren't really Jewish. Maybe you were Muslim. Now they were like in their mid-20s. And, if you looked at yourself, there's Semitic features, but it could have been one thing. It could have been the other. So, it was getting a little dicey for me. And also, what if I was wrong? I mean, we all do things that we have this conviction that I know this is happening. I know this is true, but there's the possibility of what if I'm wrong? Maybe because I was so thrilled in my role as a Jewish woman, maybe, just maybe I was wrong. I just wanted it so bad. Came back to Miami, and I told my husband, that's it. I don't want to talk about this anymore. I just can't. I'm emotionally fatigued. I can't do this anymore. But he said, no, we're going to go. He got tickets. We fly Madrid, rent a car, and we're going west. As we're going west, all of a sudden, things start becoming more sparse. And I'm getting this overflowing feeling as I'm hitting the border, getting to the border with Portugal, to the village. I'm getting the feeling that my family must have fled to Portugal. And I just like I can't explain what happened to me as a 7-year-old, I can't explain to you what happened to me as a 39-year-old going and trying to see. And I said, no. So we get to the village, bed and breakfast. There's nothing else, very difficult to be there, very hard for us to eat and everything else. So we get there, and I go into the computer, and I happen to hit upon an Inquisition document that was online. There was very little online, but that one was, and it was from Portugal, Inquisition in Lisbon and Coimbra. And there I was able to, within minutes, it was unbelievable. I was able to find a whole swath of family that had been burnt alive and had died as martyrs directly on my maternal lineage. I ended up, I think, on that day finding maybe 15, 20 eventually. And today I have found 50, 60 children, men, women, elderly, it didn't matter, burnt alive, and that's it. So that part of the equation was taken care of for these rabbis. but I still had to find that there was a Jewish presence in the village. I started walking around with my Cuban Spanish, which is not, the Royal Academy Spanish of Spain. So obviously I was a stranger, is what I'm trying to say. I'm walking around with my family tree, and I'm stopping, and I got to the door of the church, the town historian, and I'm with my tree, and I'm asking where there, I want to talk about the Jews of the village. Oh, there were never any Jews here. Wow, hit me like a ton of bricks, center chest. I was so near and so far. And I knew what it was like to go and sit in that big din again. I mean, I couldn't, go back there and come back with nothing, right? So I start pushing, and she's asking me to every Spanish name you have ever heard, tell me the name of your family. And I'm going Alvarez, Menendez, Almendral, Molina, you name it. I had 8,000 names on my tree. Different names. Why? Because during the Inquisition, people changed their names all the time. So I had all of these names on my tree, and the woman just kept saying no. And I'm holding by like 1,500, and I'm still 2.5 hours standing in front of this church with this woman who, P.S., had the same double last name as my granddad, who was married to my grandmother, and it was Ramos Ramos. So I didn't even want to ask her about her genealogy, because if I'm asking about Jews and they're so anti-Semitic and nobody wants to know, nobody's admitting there's anybody Jewish, the last thing I'm going to tell this woman is that my grandfather has her same last name, and I was getting desperate. So finally, I remember my grandfather had written real little on the top of the family tree. He had written, "Nos decían los bollicos," which means they called us bollicos. And bollico in Ladino means a little bread. And I said, wow. I told her we were bollico. She said, why didn't you tell me before? I'm going to take you to see the Oral Tradition Synagogue. And I'm like, what is going on? Seriously, the next morning we go to a place. She said it was the oral tradition, was that this was the original arch, and that the rabbi lived upstairs and the services were downstairs. I go through the whole house. There's nothing. I mean, I was never a researcher. I became a field researcher after all of this, but really, this was just not my field of expertise. I'd always been in the, medical industry. So nothing, there was nothing until we're about to leave. And there was in the garage, she said, oh, we never redid it. And I'm like, what? You never redid it? 500 years, whatever. She said, I've lived here for 80. We never. And I said, please let me see it. And we walk into the garage. There was a hole in the ground with a little baby gate. And she said, please don't go down there. That's where I keep my ham. And she's telling me that she's hanging her hams there as I'm removing the baby gate, feeling like the most horrible, ugly American, like they say, I'm like shoving my way through. And this woman is just like, she turned on the light for me. I go down 7 steps and I'm standing in a rectangular room under the garage with a huge water spout. And I'll show you that as well. A huge water spout made of granite coming into the room, and her hams are hanging everywhere. I'm taking pictures, and I realize I'm standing in the mikvah of a building, the 7 steps, the rectangular, the water coming in, and I taking pictures. I go back out into the town. I find a younger woman who asked me to see the Hebrew alphabet. She asked me to see symbology. I show her the menorah, the Hebrew alphabet. I show her pictures of coins, and just again and again and more. And she takes me around. I take hundreds of pictures, and I come back to Miami. I start mailing them all over the world, whether it's Oxford, Notre Dame, Harvard, wherever it is. I'm mailing them all over the world. And I'm emails and emails and emails. And I meet up with an archaeologist that lives in Israel. And he says, you have to go back and see these symbology that you've sent us from etchings on the walls. You have to see them at the sun of 2:00, because the crypto Jews kept their messages. The hidden Jews, those that were pretending to be Catholic, but were really practicing Judaism, which is what my family was doing. You have to see them at 2:00 to see them in the right light. So I had promised my husband that we wouldn't go back to the village. We've since been back about 12 times. But we head back there. This time I stop by Madrid. I pick up historians. I pick up a video crew. And I said, you know what, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it right, because here I am. And I get back to the village of Fermoselle. About 6-8 months had passed, and people probably thought we got rid of her. And you know what? By tenacity and alone, they should have known I was a Jew. I mean, what on earth? I mean, who does this? So I'm over there, and I start walking, and there's an elderly gentleman that tells me he's the mayor from 50 years before. And what am I looking for? And I said, thank you. I found the synagogue. I'm good. He said, no, you didn't. He said, what was the family name? And I was fully prepared. It was Boyico. I mean, who knew? And he takes me a few steps. I never saw him again, by the way. Just took me there, and I turned around, and it was like he was gone. I don't even know where he came from. I don't know where he went. And he takes me to that door, and he knocks, and he says, open the synagogue. There's a descendant of Uncle Boyico here. Whoa. The man says, Uncle Boyico, we've really waited a long time for you to come. And he opens up. It looks like a dollhouse. From the kitchen, there was a big hole, and he opens up like if it were an attic, but going down. And we step into this room where you could see there was like a rock Aron Kodesh in the front. There was like hidden in the walls. Things were hidden. And I'm standing there, and there's these cockroaches, and everybody's going crazy. The historians, everybody's going crazy. And I'm just crying. I mean, I can't believe that my family was brought from that gorgeous first building. Gorgeous, beautiful first building. And they ended up here. You could see the benches on the side and a little side entrance, like for the women on the side. And here they were, forced to pray in this terrible, terrible, dank, musty, disgusting place. And our history, our Jewish history, it talks about, yes, there was an Inquisition, but does it talk about the people that went underground? I mean, the actual people. There's a lot of things of, am I a survivor of that? I don't know if I'm a survivor of that, but I am certainly a descendant of that. So I pack up all my papers again. I pack up all the pictures. I pack up everything. I head to Israel, and I waited 2 years to have a beautiful letter translated that said that even though I had come to this place in a very roundabout way, which is for sure, I was born Jewish. My children are Jewish. My ascendants are Jewish. And it was just one of the most spectacular days of my life, and really breaking the glass ceiling for all of those that are coming behind me. And it was just amazing. It was, I'd say, the largest achievement of my life. So now, Jamie, if you could, we'll see some of the pictures. Okay, next. Okay, so here's your map of Spain showing the location of the village of Fermoselle. It's in a little dot at the end. Portugal is shrouded in gray, so you can see that it really is at the tip of this. Okay, next. This is the Hamsa that was left to me by my grandmother. And while a lot of people say to me that, yes, that the Muslim and the Moor population also use a Hamsa, she gave me this on the day she died, and she was trying to send this message from the other side. And here it is. It's very heavy. It's about 2.5 inches long. And this is what my mom, you can see it's super antique. And my mom did give it to me on the day after. Next. So here you can see this earring with a Star of David. And why do I find this to be beyond interesting as well? Because all over Spain, whether it's in Toledo and the Synagogue of Santa Maria in Toledo or anywhere else, a lot of the symbology was done with shells. If you ever get to go to the Synagogue of Santa Maria in Toledo, you will look up and you will see, or you can see it online, that all the columns, the architecture, again and again is done with shells. Next. This is an aerial view of the village of Fermoselle today. And you can see it's 2.5 miles long totally. You can see that it's built like a medieval village. Everything is kind of crazy, you know, ins and outs. The village has not changed too much in the last 500 years. Next. These are medieval church documents. So we find our lineages via church documents. So there's a great deal of finding lineages as well in state notary documents. And why do I say that? Because you're not allowed to have, let's say, a lineage or any official document that is only church document to be able to present before a Jewish court, a Beit Din. So while the majority of the documents are like this and they come from the medieval church documents, I also backed up a lot of the proof with state documents, last wills and testaments, showing the lineages. I found notary documents. So there was just, you know, an ample, as I said, a computer box full of documents. But in the church, this is what we're looking at. Okay, so this is an arched entrance to the city walls of the village of Fermoselle. Once you pass through here, it's almost like you're in the ghetto. Let's continue. Okay, so you can see that it has even a troglodyte feel. This is a village that has been around from the Celts and the Visigoths. And again, it's strategically placed on the side of Portugal. So many cultures, many peoples have gone through this, and you can see by this feel in this particular picture for sure that it was a very old one. Okay, if you look at, this is a typical street today, again, not a million years ago. So if you look at the top of the staircase and that little entrance up there, that was the entrance. You go through there, and my 15th grandmother, 1545, she lived back there, and everyone else lived up and down this street. Okay. So this is the room in the basement where the granite spout was found. This is the spout. It's unbelievable. Let's see the next picture also of it, please. Okay. So you can see it looks rough, like you would touch it, like, you know, your hands would be super rough. But the reality is that when you touch it, it's like butter. I don't know who lives in this house now. The lady that met with me, she died. And I don't know if her husband sold it. I don't know if this is open or not open, but this is what greeted me. And it was soft as butter at the end of that room. So that was what was used. Next. Okay, so the underground oral tradition synagogue. These are the steps going down into it. There's more pictures of this on my website, jeanniemilgram.com. So the next one. Okay, so I also found a mikvah in the middle of the city, and historians are now saying that this is a mikvah. You go in, and if we see the next picture, please, you can see, even though it looks super dirty, the water's crystalline clear. We checked, there were the reservoirs. It's definitely a kosher mikvah. And this is, I'm standing at the top step actually in the water, and it goes straight down. And this is definitely clean, crystal clear water. Let's continue. Okay, this is the kind of symbology that is all over in the village of my ancestors. This one, as well as in Portugal and other parts of Spain, they're called converso crosses, and they're on the side of the churches. So this one is not a Catholic cross. This is a converso cross. Converso, meaning the crypto Jews. You can see it's up on the steps of Zion, and this has been analyzed by many historians. And let's continue. On the side of one of the chapels, I found this, and And on the left, you can see the logo of the Inquisition. On the right, you can see the facsimile of the logo of the Inquisition that was done on the side of the church. Next. This is one of the carvings that need to be seen with the sun of 2 p.m. This is not a bad picture. This is not that there was a shadow. This is not that I don't know how to use a camera or an iPhone. This is that you couldn't see it if it wasn't 2 o'clock. So the next picture is that same. You can see that it's a cross. According to the historians, it's on top of the 12 tribes of Israel, and there's a sword crossing it. And on top of it, looking like a menorah, are the letters Yud Hey, Vav Hey, the name of God. So this is on the side of one of the churches. Let's continue. And by the way, this was my evidence to the Rabbanim that this town was Jewish. So there were carvings. The oldest coins in Israel will have an anchor. So there were many different places where you could see the cross with the anchor at the bottom and a circle. And you'll see it again in the next slide. So if you see it, it's very faint, but it's on the back entrance of the church. They did not fully accept the Jews that had converted. They absolutely did not. So the Jews had to come in from the back church, the back of the church. And on the back, they drew again the cross with the circle and the anchor. And they would touch it as if it were a mezuzah. It's at mezuzah height. And again, if you see it and you feel it, it's butter soft. In the middle of all of that granite, it's butter soft because they were touching it day in and day out. Next. What I found that was the most wow, knock your socks off, was that the whole town has underground tunnels from one extreme to the other. So here is the entrance to the maze of the tunnels at the beginning of the village where I showed you. And they go, and if we could see the next one, they go, sometimes you can walk through, sometimes you have to, they go from home to home, and these holes were opened in the granite in the 1500s. So who knows how? You have to go on your stomach sometimes. Sometimes, again, you can walk. Let's look at the next one. Okay, so every single structure, there's staircases, and by the way, I was scheduled to go this August. I had all set up. My husband and I both lost our moms within the last 90 days. So it's still very difficult. He lost his mom in Israel. I lost my mom October 15th, so a month and a half ago. We were supposed to go, and they're waiting for me to get there, because in this village now they have found menorahs scratched into this particular room I'm showing you, a different part of the room, because I took that picture, but there's menorahs that were scratched. So right now, we can't get there, but we'll be back with more info on that. So the next slide. Okay, so I was able to kind of number and pinpoint the Jewish quarter here to the bottom. There's blue dots. So with the historians, and again, I was waiting to go back because we do have like a whole Jewish quarter that I would like to be able to preserve and have, actual signage and the town to know their history. Next. Okay, but the number one thing that I found was this very rustic coat of arms that you can see on the left-hand side, and it says Fermoseye in English letters. And when you turn it around, and don't ask me how I came to turn it around, it was just one of those things that I'm sitting at my kitchen table and I turned it around. It says Lisgor in Hebrew, and the letters turn to Hebrew. And it says Lisgor, and it means closed. So the history of this village was completely closed. They were waiting, I guess, for me to come around. And fast forward in history, if you could give me, okay. Fasting forward in my history, in 2014, my mom tells me that she wants to meet with my rabbi, and I'm not too happy about it because it hasn't been simple at all, not simple in any way, shape, or form. But my husband, who is just a saint, if you want to call him that, from a different religion, but he took her to my rabbi, and mom told me that she did not want to die Catholic. She told him she did not want to die Catholic. As a result of that, and because of what I have from the Beit Din, the rabbi told her that she had to do one mitzvah. And that afternoon, it was a Friday, we went to her house, we lit candles. I thought I was in a Twilight Zone episode. She asked me to say it in English. She covered her eyes, and I was like, whoa. And I came home, it was Shabbos. And that Sunday, my dad calls me, listen, something's wrong with your mom. She's like, not here anymore. She went into a deep dementia. It was the last thing she ever did. And she actually returned. And it's just amazing. So since then, until October 15th, when she died, just, a month and 45 days ago, I was never able to talk to her again. Deep Alzheimer's, deep dementia, never, just hugging her and holding her. And I never knew how this came about. So she always told me that there was no, and I'm sorry, I get very emotional. This has been a long journey for me. And the fact that my mom returned and then I didn't know what went along with this is just very dramatic. So she always told me she had nothing in the house. And when my sister, she was very secretive, again, like my grandmother. And when my sister and I finally went into the house, she had the originals of most of the documents that I had spent years getting with a genealogist, the originals. I had copies. So it was just amazing. She had it all along. This was like a deep buried secret. And there was a collection of hundreds of recipes, which we'll go back to that slide. Okay, so you can see in all these little papers, they were written like by every grandmother. Every grandmother had been writing about this, going through the whole time. I mean, you had the same recipe written and you could catch the diaspora of the grandmothers by the ingredients of the recipe. I put them all together and I had women around the world and men cook. And in Israel, they published my book, The Recipes of the 15 Grandmothers, which have so many historical recipes. So let's take a look at the next slide. Okay, so these pork chops, as my Tia Paulita from the 1800s used to call them. You can see her there quite clearly. We all have a lot of these same facial features. So they are really French toast, and they look like pork chops. And then you throw they would throw an actual pork chop in the fire, and the whole room for the neighbors and everybody else would smell like pork chops, but really they were eating this French toast. If you enjoy Jamie Geller and you'd like to see this on YouTube, there is the show of Jamie Geller, where together we are making these pork chops. So next. Okay, so there's also this hornazo, which would be eaten on the left after the fast of Saint Esther on Purim. Esther on Purim became a saint for the crypto Jews, not a real saint, but so that they could pray to a saint, they called her Saint Esther. They would make this recipe, and I have it in tatters. They would make it, they'd go out to the field, and when they broke the fast, they would make this and break the fast with this. It's in the book. The Bollo Maimon is a Maimonides cake. So the really incredible amounts of history. And the next one, this churro recipe is specifically for Hanukkah. It's fried. There's so many fried things. We also have one called orjuelas, which are Haman's ears, and that's in there as well. And there is just this plethora, for lack of a better word, of incredible historical Jewish recipes dating back to the Inquisition. Next. So I want to show you, just so you'll have a real strong visual, everything. I know you can't read it. It's kind of everything that you see in dark are family members that were killed and burnt at the stake. And when you go all the way to the bottom, that's only 1,600 right there. So I'm sorry. Yeah, 1,600. So I descend directly from this tree. And if you go forward to the 1900s, but basically these were all family members. And my dad's tree, by the way, is just as extensive. And I think this is why this was so strong in me. Epigenetics, whatever you want, the turning of the soul, bloodline. Nobody can really pinpoint this. But my dad also, his family were the Sigler Espinosa family from Cordoba. And today, the house of the Juderia, the big famous house de Juderia, belonged to my 17th grandfather from my dad's side, who was Sigler. So in the front of that house, you can see, I don't have a picture here, but you can see an emblem of two peahens, which is a very Jewish emblem, and that's the family emblem for Dad. Next. So I have several books that I have been able to write to document my family. I started with my 15 grandmothers. I continued with Pyre to Fire, where I wrote a fictional, 85% non-fictional book of a typical crypto-Jewish family as they made their way through Spain and Portugal. And it's really things that I found in the notary records, things that I found through all of these documents, you know, what they wore, what they gave each other when they passed on, who they were giving the money to. And so I wrote my 15 grandmothers. You can see my grandmother smiling from the front of the book. And again, we all look alike. How I found my 15 grandmothers so people would be able to follow along and do the same thing I did. And then they are in Spanish. The book has been translated to Yiddish. It's been translated to Farsi. And as far as I know, I think that those are the only languages. Okay, Jamie, questions?
Well, there aren't any coming in the chat just yet. I think everyone is just in awe of your story. It's so inspiring. Doesn't even cover it. It's just amazing. And I know we overuse that word, but it's amazing. So I have a question. You came from pharmaceutical land. I don't know precisely what you did for pharmaceuticals, but and then you dove into this world of not just genealogy research, but archival research and so on, which, you know, I took several classes to learn how to do in my music life. So how did you learn how to do that effectively? Because obviously it was effective because you found the answers you were looking for. So was it trial and error? Did you take some classes? Like, how did you learn how to do that?
I didn't take any classes. Basically, I feel I was forced to do it. In other words, you know, when there's a project that you have to get to the end of it, like you're digging a tunnel and you know the gold's on the other side, no matter what, you're going to learn to do it. I actually give a lot of online conferences for Jewish Gen. I put together a whole collection of how to do this, and I've given it for Jewish Gen, which was amazing that they took on crypto-Jewish genealogy, and I explain how I did it, and it was just being, I just pushed myself, Jamie, because who's going to do this for me? Number one, I mean, you can pay somebody to go find this grandmother or this other grandmother, but I was driven. I would say that I was seriously driven to do this. I mean, there was no other way. And by the way, since then, I have been able to go back to 1405 and 22 grandmothers in a row. I was looking for the Jewish names of the family, and at 1405, I didn't find them. I actually found them 3 months ago, reviewing a Inquisition file of my 17th grandfather or 19th grandfather on my mom's side, and I found that I come from a family of 3 rabbis that were the Jewish court of the region that I was born in: Rabbi Castro, Rabbi Narboni, and Rabbi De Leon. So it's just amazing. I spent all of these years looking for them. And I just, like I said, I just hunkered down. And if I didn't know it, I Googled it.
So it's not just Jewish ancestry you found, it's famous Jewish ancestry.
Yes, yes. And I was really happy because my husband comes from a really famous Jewish ancestry. And I was happy that mine, I was like, hey, mine is better.
It's interesting these days. I feel like there's a lot of discussion about who counts as a Jew. There was a little bit of discussion over the recent Pew Research study about American Jews and who gets defined as a Jew for sort of census taking. And, in this discussion, I think we forget that. So, for example, if I were to have to literally prove that my grandparents were Jewish, or anyone before my grandparents, right, it would actually take a lot of work, because in this country, we don't have documents proving Jewishness. I could probably prove my parents were involved in their local synagogue, but does that literally prove, right? So you have all of this proof that most people who think of themselves as born Jewish and raised Jewish don't actually have. And I think
I'm a card carrying Jew.
Right. That's exactly right. Like, you have this official stamp of approval that most of us don't actually have.
Now, interestingly enough, a lot of people, they'll be watching this later on and they want to know about my kids. That's like the big thing. So I was the only one that returned. So my children are now older and they have their children. My son married a Costa Rican woman, and they're Catholic, but don't really practice a lot. They put their daughter in the JCC school until she was 5. And then they realized, so from like pre-K until she was 5, she was doing the whole Shabbosima and all that kind of stuff. And then they realized that it was not sustainable when she came home one Passover and said, why are you guys eating bread? So they realized, they live in Maryland, that wasn't sustainable. My daughter isn't one thing or another at all. I mean, I'm sure this took a hit for my kids. I was trying to like solve the generational thing, and I guess I messed it up. But she has a little girl. So to me, I know that the lineage is Jewish. So whether I solve it in this generation or I don't, I know that I was able to give them that. Whether they want it or not, I was able to give it to them. Today, what I do is, as director of Anusim for Latin America, what I do is that I teach hundreds of people Judaism that are trying to return, and no one pays attention to them and no one talks to them. I teach them history. I teach them all about whatever they want to learn. Usually they want to learn about kashrut. They want to learn about family purity and all this kind of stuff. And I teach them. I teach on Tuesday night in Spanish. My husband teaches on Sunday mornings in French. And he catches the communities coming out of Africa. I've been trying to digitize the Inquisition records around the world. We are very, very already very deep into the Portuguese ones. We got a signed contract, which wasn't easy. And we are now trying to get the signed contract out of Spain. I've been at this for 5 years.
Spain's a tough sell. They still basically say there's never been Jews here, and it's tough.
Yeah, no, but I advanced because I was able to. I got tired of not being able to. I was able to access the Pope via the chief rabbi of Argentina, and then they assigned me a papal emissary in the EU when I spoke over there. And I thought that the church was putting a stop to it, but it wasn't the church. It was more of the government. But I made such a ruckus with all of that we are literally in the redlining contract stage at this juncture. 2 years ago, my husband and I both sold our companies to dedicate ourselves to teaching, to running around the world, and to raising awareness on this topic.
Well, I think we're all glad that you've done that. We're running close to the end of time, but I have a recipe question. So recently, one of my hobbies has become learning to chant Torah. And so I'm learning the bit that starts with the 8th plague and, for later. And it mentions about taking the Paschal offering from either the sheep or the goats. And so I am now on a personal quest for Passover goat recipes because I love goat. have you heard of such a thing? Is this
Absolutely,
a thing?
because right before COVID in 2018, my husband and I went 2018 and 2017, and we made Passover for descendants of the crypto Jews. We had 155 in one time, and the other time we had 100 and something. We did it in 2 different villages and I asked somebody to come and shecht to give me kosher meat, and I asked for a cow, and I got a goat. So I will send you the recipe for the goat stew.
Yeah, I am so excited. And, you know, as I was reading this, I was like, you know, I bet the Jews of India have already figured this out and already have a plan. But it seems like, you know, it's one of those things that, you know, as far as I know, coming from Ashkenazi roots, there's
well,
one
you know,
food
they
way.
dropped off the meat, and you know, I buy meat in those, like everybody, you know, in those little packages at the grocery store, you know, covered in plastic, and they dropped off this like bin of parts, and I'm looking at it like, what am I gonna do with it? And it was a cut up goat. Wow. Okay, and I had to learn on the spot how to make goat stew.
Well, I'm sure it was amazing and yummy. So I love learning new ways of Jewish practice, new Jewish food ways. And I think, you know, one of the things your story shows is that the world of Jewish life is so complex, so rich, so full of different ways of being Jewish that we can learn so much from each other, as much as we have so much in common to start with. You know,
and in this
you
last
all thought of churros for Hanukkah. We didn't.
The day we started from Kulanu, which is an organization that's been around for about 25, 30 years, all volunteer all the time. And what we do is that we help all of these communities outside. So my husband has been teaching the ones returning from Africa. And we decided this week with Kulanu that we were going to make a kosher African cookbook. So if there's anybody out there in YouTube that has kosher recipes from Africa, send them on over to me.
Well, since you mentioned that, there's a group of people here in Metro Detroit. I'm forgetting which temple they're associated with. I want to say Temple Israel, but you all can correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. That is working with a community in Gondar in Ethiopia, working to help them get recognized by Israel and airlifted out and all of that, and has visited there several times. So if any of you are listening, I want to say Susie Coleman is involved.
Is that Rabbi Capers funny?
I don't think so.
No, okay, good. So please, if anybody's listening.
If anybody's listening here in Metro Detroit that knows the group of people I'm talking about and maybe has some recipes to send to Jeannie, please get in touch. You can find us through our website. You can also, Jeannie's website is just jeanniemilgram.com. I'm going to put that up in the chat here.
You're right, Jamie. This just shows us how diverse we are as Jews, even though people, you know, just slice it into Ashkenaz and Sephardim. And it was like, no. There's a whole spectrum out there of us.
Absolutely. And
it's been a real pleasure. I thank you so much.
We are so happy to have you. I'm going to bring Debbie back on for our official thank you and goodbye.
Well, thank you. I could listen to you for hours. If I'm in Florida, a couple of us might be calling you to get together.
Absolutely.
Amazing story. And I belong to Temple Israel. Temple Israel, Rabbi Bennett has gone with, and I can't think of the name of the congregant, who they have been to Africa and working with the group. So I'll give any info I find to you. I don't know about recipes, but I know they've been there. And right. Thank you, Jeannie, for sharing an amazing story. I think I was crying with you, and so sorry for both of your losses in the last month or so. To everyone watching, remember to like this video, subscribe to the YouTube channel for the JCC, visit our website where you can get Jeannie's book through the book fair website, culturalarts.jcc.org/book fair is the full schedule as well and ways to get involved. And just watch out for more of our programs. There will be 70 different programs over this coming year. So we're so glad to have had you and hope you love this as much as we did. So take care and watch for the next one.